Kentucky, 1899. A farming family hears voices calling from the darkness, their own voices, asking to be let inside. But they're already inside the cabin. What came down from those Appalachian mountains learned to wear human faces like masks and speak with stolen words. This is the true account of the Turner family's encounter with the Skinwalkers. If this story reaches into your nightmares, subscribe, because the old horrors are just beginning. I arrived in those Kentucky hills in the spring of 1899, hired on with my brother-in-law's logging crew, though the Turner family had been cultivating that hollow since long before the war ever touched these mountains. Jacob Turner was the sort of man who could predict a storm by the tilt of the wind or the way lichen clung to oak trunks, and his son Eli, only 16, carried that same steady competence in his bones. Their cabin sat 3 miles beyond our timber camp. And every Sunday, I passed it on my walk to hear Reverend Cole preach in the settlement. The clearing around the house was hemmed in by ancient forest, trees so dense that even midday felt like twilight beneath their canopy. Mrs. Turner had passed 2 winters earlier, and the Reverend made it his habit to visit Jacob and Eli often, bringing sacks of cornmeal and tidings from farther down the mountain. The first days of October ushered in an early chill, one that seeped into your joints and sent white clouds from your mouth before dawn had fully broken. I was guiding a wagon load of freshly cut pine along the logging road when I heard the hounds. They weren't barking. They were shrieking. 3 of Jacob's dogs crying out in a way I had never known an animal could, sharp and frantic, as though seized by terror all at once. Then it stopped. Total stillness. No wind. No birds. I stood frozen in the road, hands gripping the cart rail as a crawling sensation ran up my spine like an electric shock. That night, Jacob came down to our camp. He offered no plea for assistance and gave little explanation, only said that his dogs were dead. All 3 of them. He'd found their bodies scattered along the edge of his land, ripped apart but untouched as food. Something came for them, he muttered, staring into the firelight. Something that wasn't hungry. Our foreman, a Swedish fellow named Anderson, suggested it might have been a mountain lion. There were still panthers in those hills, though they seldom ventured near homesteads. Jacob slowly shook his head. The tracks weren't right, he said. They began on 4 legs. They ended on 2. Reverend Cole rode into camp 2 days later, atop his aging roan horse. He looked worn, older than a man in his early 40s ought to. When I asked if he'd heard about Jacob's hounds, his expression hardened. "I have," he replied, "and I've heard more besides." He dismounted, tied the mare, and settled onto a stump near where I was honing saw teeth. Eli told me they've been hearing things after dark, voices, his mother's voice calling to them from the trees, and Jacob's voice calling Eli by name. Only Jacob is sitting inside the cabin when it happens. I stopped working. The whetstone went quiet against the blade. "How long?" I asked. Reverend Cole rubbed his face with both hands. 3 weeks, maybe more. They didn't want to seem foolish, so they kept it to themselves. But last night, Jacob heard Eli calling for help from the barn, desperate-like, screaming. He ran out there with his rifle, and Eli was standing right behind him in the cabin doorway, asking where he was going. The Reverend's hands were shaking when he reached for his canteen. "There's old stories in these hills," he said quietly. "Things the Cherokee knew about before we ever came here. Things that watch us. Things that learn." I'd heard stories too. Every lumber camp had them. Creatures that walked like men but weren't. Spirits that wore the faces of the dead. The old-timers called them different names. But they all agreed on one thing. You didn't talk about them directly, and you sure as hell didn't go looking for them. That Sunday, I walked up to the Turner place, instead of going to the settlement. The clearing looked the same as always: cabin, barn, chicken coop, split rail fence. But something felt wrong. The chickens weren't making noise. No roosters crowing, no hens clucking. When I got closer, I saw why. Every bird was dead, not scattered like the dogs, arranged, laid out in a circle around the well, necks broken, all of them facing the cabin. Jacob was sitting on his porch with his rifle across his knees. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Eli was inside, visible through the window, pacing. "It came again last night," Jacob said without looking at me. Scratched at the door, used my voice, called Eli by his childhood name, the one only his mother used. I heard myself talking, heard my own voice promising to let him out to play like he was 6 years old again. His hands tightened on the rifle. That voice knew things, private things, things between a father and son. I sat down on the porch steps. The October sun was bright, but it didn't seem to reach the cabin properly. Everything looked slightly faded, like we were sitting in a photograph instead of the real world. "What did you do?" I asked. Jacob finally looked at me. His eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. "I opened the door," he said. "I had to know. I had to see what was using my voice." The silence stretched between us. A crow called somewhere distant, the first bird sound I'd heard since arriving. "There was nothing there," Jacob continued. "Just the clearing, empty, but I could still hear it. My voice coming from the tree line, asking why Eli wouldn't come outside, asking why my son was afraid of me." He stood up abruptly, the rifle loose in his hands. I fired into the woods, emptied the magazine. The voice laughed. It laughed with my laugh, and then it stopped. Eli came out then, pale and drawn. He was a big kid, strong from farm work, but he looked fragile now, hollowed out. "It's been getting closer," he said. "First it was just voices in the distance, then at the edge of the clearing. Last night it was right against the cabin wall. I could hear it breathing. It sounded like Pa. Even the breathing sounded exactly like him." Reverend Cole arrived an hour later with 4 men from the settlement. They brought rifles, lanterns, and a determination that felt more desperate than confident. The Reverend had convinced them this was a mad animal, something rabid and dangerous that needed to be hunted down. But I saw his face when he blessed the ammunition with whispered prayers. He knew what we were dealing with, even if he couldn't say it out loud. We decided to wait until nightfall. If the thing came back, we'd be ready. The men positioned themselves around the clearing, 2 in the barn loft, 2 at the tree line, Cole and myself on the cabin porch with Jacob and Eli inside. The sun went down fast that time of year, and the temperature dropped with it. By full dark, our breath was fogging thick, and frost was forming on the fence rails. The first sound came at 8 o'clock. A child's laughter, high and bright, coming from the direction of the well. Then Mrs. Turner's voice, calling Eli in for supper the way she must have done 1,000 times before she died. Eli made a sound in his throat like a trapped animal. Through the window, I saw him cover his ears. But the voice continued, patient and loving and completely wrong. Then my own voice joined in. I heard myself calling from the barn, telling the men I'd found tracks, telling them to come quick. I was sitting right there on the porch, but I could hear myself speaking from 50 yards away. The 2 men in the barn loft shouted down, asking if I'd really called them. The confusion was instant, electric. The thing was dividing us, making us doubt our own senses. Reverend Cole stood up, and in a voice louder than I'd ever heard him use, he began to pray. Not the gentle prayers from Sunday service, but something older. Words that might have been Latin, or might have been Cherokee, or might have been something else entirely. The voices stopped. For maybe 10 seconds, there was complete silence. Then something moved at the edge of the clearing. It was tall, too tall. It moved wrong, like it was remembering how to walk rather than actually walking. The lantern light caught it for just a moment. A shape that might have been human once, might have been animal, might have been both or neither. Its head turned toward us with a movement no neck should make. And then, in perfect unison, it spoke with every voice we'd heard that night. All of them at once. Jacob's voice, Eli's voice, Mrs. Turner's voice, my voice, asking us why we were so afraid, asking us why we wouldn't come outside, asking us why we were hiding from ourselves. The rifles fired, all of them, ragged and desperate. The thing moved fast, faster than anything that size should move. It was there at the tree line, and then it wasn't. It was gone into the forest with a sound like branches breaking. And then even that sound stopped. We searched until dawn with torches and prayers and loaded guns. We found tracks. They started on 4 legs at the clearing's edge, each print pressed deep into the frozen mud. Halfway to the tree line, they changed, became something else, became human footprints, bare and impossibly large. At the forest's edge, they simply ended, like whatever made them had stepped off the earth entirely. We stayed at the Turner cabin until sunrise painted the ridges orange and gold. Nobody wanted to say what we'd seen, but we all saw it. The thing had moved like smoke and bone together, and when those rifles fired, I'd swear some of the bullets went straight through it without slowing down. Anderson, our foreman, found one of his spent cartridges buried in a tree trunk 20 yards behind where the creature had stood. The bullet had passed through empty air and kept going. Reverend Cole gathered us in the cabin as light broke, and he spoke plainly for the first time. The Cherokee called them skinwalkers, he said, witches who wore animal skins and walked in shapes that weren't their own. They could take voices, take faces. They fed on fear and confusion. Jacob sat at his table with Eli beside him, both of them looking like they'd aged 10 years overnight. My grandfather saw one, Jacob said quietly, back in Tennessee before the removal. He said it followed their camp for 3 nights, calling to them in the voices of children who died on the trail. Said the only way to stop it was to call it by its true name. But nobody knew what that was anymore. He looked at his hands, rough and scarred from decades of farm work. He said it left on the 4th night because something else came. Something older. Something the skinwalker was afraid of. I thought about that while the others discussed keeping watch, setting up a rotation, bringing more men from the settlement. But I was thinking about those tracks, about how they'd changed from animal to human, and then disappeared entirely, about how the thing had spoken in our voices all at once, like it was showing us what it had collected, like it was proud. Anderson caught my eye and nodded toward the door. We stepped outside into the cold morning air, and he pulled a flask from his coat. "I've logged timber from Georgia to Oregon," he said after a long drink. "I've seen grizzly bears take down horses. I've seen mountain lions stalk camps for weeks. This ain't that." He passed me the flask, and the whiskey burned going down, but it didn't warm anything. "Cherokee or not, that thing's got intelligence," he continued. "It's testing us, learning us. Every voice it used was someone connected to this family or this place. It's been watching for weeks, maybe months, learning how we talk, how we sound when we're scared or hurt or calling for help." He looked back at the cabin, at the men inside making plans that probably wouldn't work. "Question is, what's it learning for? What's it planning to do with all those voices?" The answer came that afternoon. Eli had gone to check the root cellar behind the cabin, and he found something that made him call out for his father. We all came running. Inside the cellar, preserved in the cool darkness, someone had left a collection of objects. Personal items. A pipe that had belonged to Jacob's father, dead 15 years. A ribbon Mrs. Turner used to wear in her hair. A small wooden horse Eli had carved as a child and lost years ago. And photographs. Family photographs that had been stored in a trunk in the barn loft. Photographs nobody had looked at in years. They were arranged carefully on the cellar floor in a circle, facing inward. In the center sat a bundle of animal bones bound with human hair. Reverend Cole went pale when he saw it. "It's building something," he said. "Some kind of working, a ritual." He picked up the bundle carefully, like it might explode, and I saw his hands were shaking worse than before. "This hair... Jacob, this looked like your wife's hair to you?" Jacob took the bundle and nodded slowly. His face had gone gray. Her hair was this color, this length. We buried her with it braided. The implications hung in the air like smoke. The thing had been in the cemetery, had disturbed the dead, had taken pieces of them to use in whatever dark purpose it was working toward. Eli made a choking sound and ran outside. We heard him being sick in the yard. Anderson was the one who said what we were all thinking. "It's not just hunting. It's claiming. It wants this place, wants this family. It's been building up to something, and tonight's probably when it happens." He looked at the Reverend. "Your prayers worked last night. Drove it back. You got anything stronger?" Cole's face was grim. "I can try. But I'm a Methodist minister from Virginia. What I know about this kind of evil comes from books, not experience. The Cherokee, they had medicine men who understood these things, who knew the words and the ways. I'm just a preacher who's read too much and prayed too hard." But he tried anyway. Spent the afternoon preparing what he called a sanctification. He walked the property line with salt and prayers, marked the doorways with oil he'd blessed, made each of us carry a small cross he'd carved from rowan wood. "Rowan's supposed to ward off evil," he explained, though he didn't sound convinced. "Old European tradition. Might work, might not. Everything I'm doing is throwing old wisdom at a wall and hoping something sticks." He blessed the ammunition again, this time mixing ash from the morning fire with creek water and marking each bullet with a cross. The settlement men wanted to leave before dark, and I couldn't blame them. They had families, homes, lives that didn't include fighting shape-shifting witches in the Kentucky mountains. But Jacob and Eli couldn't leave. This was their land, their home. Everything they had was in this hollow. So Anderson and I stayed, along with Reverend Cole and one settlement man named William Marsh, who was either braver or more foolish than the others. 4 of us to face something that could be anything, sound like anyone, and maybe couldn't be killed by normal means. We ate a cold supper as the sun went down. Nobody wanted to light a fire and lose their night vision. Jacob had brought out every gun he owned. 3 rifles, a shotgun, and an old revolver that had seen service in the war. We loaded them all, checked them twice, and positioned ourselves inside the cabin. Eli and his father upstairs at the bedroom window, the rest of us downstairs covering the front door, back door, and side windows. The waiting was worse than the previous night because now we knew what was coming. It started at 7 o'clock, earlier than before. Mrs. Turner's voice, calling from the well, sweet and patient and hideously wrong. "Eli, honey, come help me with the water." Then Jacob's voice from the barn. "Son, I need you out here. Horse is colicky." But Jacob was right upstairs, and we could hear him moving around, hear his breath catching as he listened to himself calling from outside. The thing was playing the same trick, but this time it knew we were ready. This time it was doing it anyway, like it didn't care. Like it wanted us to know it was unstoppable. Then my voice came, and my blood went cold. I heard myself calling from just outside the front door. "Anderson, I can't get the door open. I'm locked out. Let me in, it's coming." The voice was perfect. Every inflection, every habit of speech. If I'd been outside, I would have believed it was me. Anderson raised his rifle toward the door, and I saw the confusion in his eyes. How do you shoot something that sounds exactly like your friend? Reverend Cole started praying again, loud and steady. The voices outside multiplied, all of us now calling to each other, begging to be let in, screaming warnings, crying for help. It was chaos, a storm of familiar voices saying terrible things. And then, underneath it all, something else. A low sound, almost subsonic, a humming that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. The lantern light started flickering, though there was no wind inside the cabin. William Marsh broke first. He stood up from his position at the back window and shouted that he heard his daughter crying outside, his little girl who was safe at home 15 miles away. He was at the door before we could stop him, throwing the bolt, pulling it open. Reverend Cole hit him with a shoulder tackle that sent them both sprawling. The door swung wide, and we saw what was standing on the porch. It wore William's face, perfect in every detail. His mustache, his scar, his tired eyes. But it was too tall, the proportions subtly wrong, like someone had stretched him on a rack. It smiled with William's mouth, and the teeth were all different lengths. "You're not real friendly," it said in William's voice. Then it spoke in all our voices at once, that same horrible chorus from the night before. "Why won't you let us in? We just want to come home." Anderson fired first. The rifle shot was deafening in the enclosed space, and the bullet caught the thing in the chest. It staggered backward, more from surprise than damage, and the William face flickered like a reflection in disturbed water. For just a moment, I saw what was underneath. Something gray and lean with too many joints in its limbs and eyes that reflected the lantern light like a wolf's. Then the face snapped back into place, and it laughed with William's laugh before dropping off the porch and vanishing into the darkness. The real William was sobbing on the floor, and Reverend Cole was praying over him in a constant stream of Latin and English mixed together. I slammed the door shut and threw the bolt, but my hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries. From upstairs, Jacob called down that he could see movement in the tree line. Multiple shapes, all man-sized, all moving wrong. "It's not alone anymore," he shouted. "There's 3 of them now, maybe 4. That's when I understood. The ritual in the cellar, the collection of voices, the weeks of watching. It had been calling others, building a pack. Whatever these things were, they hunted together once they'd weakened their prey enough. We'd been thinking about one creature, planning for one creature. But skinwalkers traveled in groups. The old story said so. They'd corrupted each other, learned from each other, fed off each other's darkness. The scratching started on all sides of the cabin at once. Not frantic animal scratching, but deliberate, rhythmic. They were marking the walls, testing them, looking for weaknesses. The roof creaked above us, and dust filtered down from the ceiling boards. Something heavy was up there, walking across the shingles. Eli's voice came from overhead. "Pa, there's one on the roof." But Eli was upstairs with Jacob. I could hear both of them moving around up there, which meant the thing on the roof was using Eli's voice to cause confusion, to make us doubt everything we heard. Anderson pulled me aside, his face grim in the flickering lamplight. "We can't stay here," he whispered. "They'll get in eventually. We need to run for the settlement while we still can." But I'd seen how fast those things moved, seen how they disappeared into the forest like smoke. Running in the dark would be suicide. At least the cabin had walls, had doors, had windows we could shoot from. Outside we'd be exposed, easy prey scattered in the woods. The scratching stopped. Complete silence fell, so sudden it was like going deaf. Reverend Cole stopped praying mid-word, and we all froze, listening. Then Jacob's voice called from upstairs. "It's backing off. All of them. They're returning to the tree line." But something in his tone was wrong. Just slightly off. Like an instrument that's almost in tune but not quite. Anderson heard it too. We both looked at the stairs. "Jacob?" I called up. "That really you?" A pause. Then his voice again, perfectly natural now. "Course it's me. Who else would it be?" But he didn't come to the top of the stairs where we could see him. And Eli didn't say anything at all. The silence from the upstairs bedroom was total. I started for the stairs with my rifle raised, and Anderson was right behind me. Each step creaked under our boots, impossibly loud in the quiet cabin. At the top of the stairs, the bedroom door was closed. I'd seen Jacob leave it open earlier. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might crack a rib. I reached for the door handle with my left hand, rifle ready in my right. The metal was ice cold, colder than the October air could account for. I turned it slowly and pushed the door open. Jacob and Eli were standing at the window with their backs to us, perfectly still, looking out at the clearing. "Jacob?" I said again. They didn't move, didn't turn around, just kept staring out that window like they were watching something fascinating in the darkness. Anderson stepped up beside me, and we both saw it at the same time, the wrongness in their silhouettes. The proportions were off, too tall, limbs too long, heads at slightly incorrect angles. "That ain't them," Anderson breathed. And the two figures at the window turned around in perfect unison, necks rotating farther than necks should rotate, and they smiled with Jacob's and Eli's faces. Behind those smiles were teeth that belonged in a predator's mouth. "We're already inside," they said together in a horrible harmony of father and son, voices blended together. "We've been inside since sunset. While you were watching the doors, we came down the chimney. While you were listening to voices outside, we replaced the voices inside." Anderson fired point blank into the Jacob thing's chest. It fell backward through the window in an explosion of glass and wood, and I shot the Eli thing twice before it could move. It went down hard, twitching, but even as it fell, its face was changing, cycling through different faces. William's face, Mrs. Turner's face, my face staring up at me with dead eyes. Then its features settled into something that wasn't human at all. A narrow skull with too many teeth and skin like gray leather stretched over bird-hollow bones. From outside came howling. Not wolf howls or coyote howls, but something worse, something that hurt to hear. The pack was calling to each other, and the sound was filled with rage. We'd killed one of them. Now they'd kill all of us. I ran to the window and looked down. The Jacob thing was lying in the yard below, broken and twisted, its body shifting between forms, even in death. And emerging from the tree line came the others. 4 of them, walking upright on legs that bent backward at the knee. Their faces were blank, unformed, waiting to choose which masks to wear. "But where's the real Jacob and Eli?" I shouted. Anderson was already searching the room, throwing open the wardrobe, checking under the bed. He found them in the corner behind a cedar chest, bound and gagged, eyes wide with terror but alive. Alive. While we'd been downstairs, the Skinwalkers had taken them silently, replaced them with duplicates, and we'd never noticed until it was almost too late. How long had those things been standing at the window wearing their faces? 5 minutes? 20? How long had we been defending a cabin that was already compromised? Reverend Cole was calling up the stairs, asking what the shots were for, and I shouted down that we had the real Turner men, that there had been duplicates in the house. The creatures outside were at the cabin walls now, and I could hear them scraping at the boards, trying to tear their way inside. William Marsh was screaming prayers at the top of his lungs. Anderson cut Jacob and Eli free, and we hauled them toward the stairs. That's when the back door exploded inward. Not opened, exploded. Splinters of wood flew across the downstairs room, and one of the creatures came through in a rush of impossible speed. It grabbed William Marsh before any of us could react, and its face cycled through a dozen different identities in 2 seconds before settling on William's own face. It spoke with his voice, perfect and clear. "Tell my family I love them," it said. Then it snapped his neck with a twist of hands that had too many fingers. We ran, out the front door, into the clearing, toward the tree line and the logging road beyond. The creatures were everywhere now, moving through the darkness, calling to us in the voices of everyone we'd ever known. But dawn was coming. I could see the faintest gray line on the eastern horizon, and the things were falling back, retreating as the darkness weakened. We made it to the logging road as the sun broke over the ridges, and in that first pure light, the skinwalkers simply vanished. Not ran away, vanished, like they'd never been there at all. Jacob Turner and his son Eli left Kentucky a week later, sold the farm for nothing to a speculator from Louisville who didn't know the history. Reverend Cole performed a burial service for William Marsh and never preached in that settlement again. Anderson and I finished the logging season, but we never went back to those mountains. Some places aren't meant for human habitation. Some hollows belong to older things, things that learn to wear our faces and speak with our voices and hunt us with our own words turned against us. The cabin still stands, last I heard, empty, waiting. And sometimes, travelers on that logging road report hearing voices calling from the clearing. Familiar voices, friendly voices, voices that know their names and their secrets, and exactly what to say to make them stop and listen and maybe, just maybe, step off the road and walk toward the tree line where the darkness waits with open arms and 1,000 stolen faces.